But you know what relish is who's looking out for us? Where is the us care? And you can do a lot of us care on your own by, like I said, learning about yourself and learning about your partner. And impacting how you show up every day. I think the important thing is that no matter how short or long you've been together, the other person has a choice every single day as to whether they're going to keep being there and show up, and they can leave. People get complacent, and this is about fighting that complacency and keeping things alive and keeping things fresh and being there for each other and showing up every day as your best self. And that's the sort of thesis behind Relish.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Look Up podcast. I'm your host, Mark Weinstein, recording here from the south of France in the middle of the coronavirus outbreak. Wow, what a crazy time to be alive. So many wild things happening in the world around us. I invite you all to take a few deep breaths, stay grounded, to take care of yourself and your loved ones, and also to remember that life goes on and to try to continue to find joy and meaning from all that you do, in spite of what's happening at such a macro level. It's March 10th, 2020, and I'm here to bring you another episode, another interview with an incredible human. This guest is Lesley Eccles. She is the founder and CEO of Relish, which is the first ever relationship training app that makes it easier to build happy, healthy, and more connected relationships. When I heard that Lesley was doing podcasts, I was super interested in chatting with her because she is a serial entrepreneur who has been the co-founder of a huge business where she led marketing, a company called FanDuel. And FanDuel is a fantasy sports company which Lesley and her team grew into a multi-billion-dollar business. Lesley did it all while she was a mother of 3. And what's super interesting about her story is that she co-founded FanDuel with her husband, Nigal. That story, which we discuss in detail, is incredibly important to listen to if you are an entrepreneur or a founder of a company. They went through a decade long of trials and tribulations, building a company in a highly regulated industry with massive competition. There were a lot of sharks at the gate that were trying to take their equity from them. They ended up getting pretty badly hurt by their investors financially, and Lesley tells a little bit of that story, although she can't go into too many details because there is an ongoing lawsuit. But I felt that this was so important to share with you all. One, because this woman had incredible success. She's a female founder. She was a mother. She lived a life that probably 5 lives that I couldn't imagine the strain and stress, but she's a freaking champion. Another reason why I shared is because this story of, founder success, but still having a extremely challenging time and experiencing loss in the face of building $1 billion business. I mean, I can't even believe it. I've been a startup founder 2 times and spent 2 years on each of them. Neither of them turned out the way that I wanted, but knowing what that is like, I can't imagine having succeeded in all of the ways that she did and still struggling because the investors didn't deliver. So we talk a lot about that. And then, of course, we talk about her new company, Relish, which is all about us work. So a lot of these episodes, we talk about self-work, different practices that you can put into place to take care of yourself, different philosophies. But of course, relationship is probably one of the greatest tools that we have in our lives to reflect on ourselves, because life is not lived in isolation. We are all householder yogis, those of us that are practicing. We're not ascetic monks living in a cave. And so how do we take our practices into relationship? How do we improve our communication skills? How do we get empathetic with others? And so that's what Relish is all about, specifically in romantic relationships. So we dig deep in this episode on what it means to be a mother, a wife, and a startup founder. Lesley offers some incredible advice for young founders who find themselves in the position of raising capital. We describe different self-care practices, and Lesley has a unique practice. I mean, you'll hear about it on this episode, but it's not meditation, it's not breath work, it's not kind of the standard what you would expect about self-work or self-care. But I think that's a lesson to all of us that self-work needn't be some highfalutin spiritual practice, but can be something very simple that grounds you, or something less obvious. And we discuss all the different relationship styles, the importance of therapy and communication, and Lesley's passion for improving the relationships of all of her Relish users. So it's been said that a thorn of experience is worth a wilderness of warning. And Lesley has a ton of great insights to share from 25 years of marriage, nearly as many parenting, and over a decade starting and building multi-billion-dollar companies. I'll let her do the rest of the talking. So without further ado, Lesley, Eccles.
Do you even remember what we talked about last time? No.
No idea.
Okay, cool.
They were like, yeah, whatever, I've heard it before.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's I'm excited to learn more. So, Lesley, thanks for coming back on the Look Up podcast. Just for listeners, I mentioned this early this year, but my bag was stolen. I had 6 podcast episodes on my computer, which was in the bag. My first 2 months of content for 2020. And Lesley was one of the people that I had spoken to that I was most excited to share with you. So she graciously decided to give me another hour of her time in spite of being in the midst of building another startup company, Relish. So I'm super, super appreciative, Lesley, for you coming back on the show. Thank you.
Pleasure. I enjoyed it last time. I'm sure I'll enjoy it this time as well.
Excellent. So I'm thinking about, what we spoke about last time, and it's like, I know we have to go over some of the stuff that we discussed because it's pretty juicy. And maybe we'll be able to go deeper into it. So I guess, the starting point for me is going to be your experience at FanDuel. So why don't we start there? It's a crazy story, and it includes DraftKings as well to an extent, but they're the enemy. So it's one of the many villains of the story.
So we can go right back to the start if you like.
Yes.
2007, my husband and I decided that we wanted to start a business together. And I think there's never a good time to start a business. I think there's always a reason not to. 2007 was definitely not a good time to start a business from a economics point of view, from a personal point of view. I just had a baby, I had a toddler, we just taken out a mortgage. It was a terrible time to start a business. But anyway, we figured if we don't make the jump now, we're never going to do it. And my husband quit his job. We had an idea for a game. It was a prediction market game where you made predictions on news stories. Super fun game. But we took we took VC money in 2008, and we couldn't figure out a way to monetize the product. And obviously, we're under a lot of pressure from our investors to make sure that we got them a return. So going into 2009, we decided to look at pivoting into a different business. And, we started the company originally in Scotland. I'm Scottish. I moved to New York about 4 years ago. But none of the founders of FanDuel were actually from the US. We took a really tough road in terms of our choice of business. We were not the target market. And that's always harder. I think it brings a new perspective to things. You're able to look at things with fresh eyes that maybe other people who are more entrenched in the industry wouldn't have noticed. But anyway, we pivoted into FanDuel in the summer of 2009, and then spent 10 years building that company up, basically brick by brick, really, getting a deep understanding of the pain points around fantasy sports and how we might build a product that would solve some of those pain points.
Yeah, and just for the listeners, what was the product? What is FanDuel?
So FanDuel originally was daily fantasy sports. So taking the season-long version of fantasy sports and shortening it to either a day or a week, depending on the sport, and allowing users to play for money and sign up to all different types of leagues. And it had never been done before. And we really created the market around it, created an entirely new industry. So it was challenging for many years. And then going into 2015, you mentioned DraftKings earlier. DraftKings appeared in around about 2013, and they were very aggressive in terms of a competitor. They clearly wanted to win the marketplace, and we ended up in a deeply competitive battle for market share in 2015. And at the start of that year, as a board, we sat together and we said, look, we know how DraftKings are going to go after us, and we need to decide, are we going to match them toe for toe, or are we going to pack up and go home because they'll just take all of our market share? So at that point we said, no, we're going to aim by the end of this year to be at a point where we're 50-50 in the market.
And the economics of sports betting sites, or really betting sites in general, is that it's so important to have scale, because the larger the scale, the larger the pot, and then more people will come for the larger pot. So there's major, what are called network effects in, power laws apply to sports betting.
Particularly in the daily fantasy sports space, where it was about the pot. Sports betting is slightly different, but certainly whenever your marketing is all about who has the most prizes, then liquidity becomes really, really important.
Absolutely. And so you're starting a company. First off, you started a company in 2007, so right in the midst of the financial crisis. Second off, you started a company from Scotland, and we're seeking VC capital, and clearly not in a place where the VCs were looking at that time, let alone, I don't even know today.
And fantasy sports was not a sexy industry.
And I was going to say, and then you were in fantasy sports was basically all Yahoo at that time, not a lot of fantasy sports betting. And you're going after a highly regulated market in the US in particular in gambling, and kind of pioneering, that market, which regulators had their eyes on, because for whatever reasons, gambling can only happen in very specific ways in very specific places. Right. So would you describe yourself as a masochist?
Possibly. Hindsight, yes. No, we were just very determined. Once you set out on a course of action, I'm the sort of person that if I decide to do something, I'm going to be all in. And I think that's very much the situation that we were in. We decided that we were going to start a business. We invested our life savings in the business, and we pivoted into something that none of us expected to be in. But certainly the more we investigated that area and that industry and the potential of it, we were all very excited about what it might turn into. I don't think I've ever done anything the easy way. So why change the habit of a lifetime?
For sure. I mean, and the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Or is meant to be worth the squeeze. And I forgot to mention, you also had just had a small child, and gotten married. And so that was the additional aspect. And that's something that I definitely want to touch on. We spoke about it last time. What was it like starting a company with your husband?
Do you know what? Nigel and I really enjoyed working together. We work very well together. We complement each other really well. And, most people that I talk to about it are horrified that we would have even contemplated working together. But we definitely enjoyed that experience. Second time round, so we both left FanDuel and gone on to build new businesses. And we actually have offices right next door to each other, but we decided to start our own businesses individually. And really the main reason is that from an investor's perspective, I would call it a yellow flag for investors.
Yeah.
Have a husband and wife team starting a business together. And certainly in the early days of FanDuel, my name was kind of left off the pitch deck. No one wanted to kind of admit that there was a husband and wife situation here. Obviously, the investors would find out, and they didn't like it. They saw it as a risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which in my mind is absolutely crazy. We've been together for 25 years. If we were going to divorce, we would have divorced long before that. And honestly, I think that, I always say when you're doing a startup, it puts a pressure on your relationship anyway, even if you're not both in it together, because it is so all consuming and it is all you think about and it is all you want to talk about. And if I wasn't in it with Nigel, the amount of stress that we were under within that business, I'm pretty sure we would have separated if we hadn't both been in it together, because we understood the pressure each of us was under, and we had different roles and responsibilities, and we were able to shoulder that pressure in different ways and at different points of the year. And really just juggle being startup founders with being mom and dad. And that was an important element as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, I think the VCs, take the standpoint, the number one reason for startup failure is typically founder disputes. If you're married, you already have pressure on your relationship from the responsibilities of marriage. And then you double that with having a business to take care of. And if there's any issues at home, now you have a truly founder, split, a founder divorce. That's a huge issue. But I hear you. I mean, I think, what you're highlighting to me is this element of any successful relationship, which is empathetic communication, let's call it. So you understood what Nigel was going through. Nigel understood what you were going through. And therefore you're able to kind of meet at the certain level and appreciate that and show respect for that. Whereas if one of you had been working on a startup and the other were kind of in the typical 9 to 5, coming home at 5 p.m. saying, I want to hang out with my partner, and you're there on your computer taking your 15th phone call of the day, and you have 6 more hours of work to do.
Right. There's just a lack of understanding there, or it's fine for a little while, but then it gets old pretty quickly, right? If you're a team at home, you're a team in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, like what I'm sure listeners, would love to understand, kind of like, as someone that's been in the trenches with her husband, so to speak, and experienced this high intensity environment together, plus building a family together. What, not relationship advice, but what qualities do you believe that you and your husband individually have, and or that your relationship has, that has kept such a strong bond?
Nigel and I are very different people. He is definitely the optimist, and I'm definitely more of the worrier. I think over the years, we've gradually met more in the middle, which I think has been healthy for both of us. And I think just being very respectful for each other. I think respect is the number one criteria in any relationship. Doesn't matter what type of relationship it is. If you don't respect the other person, that's going to be really detrimental. And particularly in founder relationship and marriage or intimate relationship, that respect is, it's got to be number one. Respect and trust. Trust is a big issue for me in terms of, I understand how important that is. And we haven't gotten on to Relish yet, but Relish is my new company. One of the most enjoyed lessons in Relish is called jumping to good conclusions. And this talks very much to this element of, you need to trust that the other person in the relationship is doing what they think is the right thing. And you should assume at all times that they're going to do the right thing. And I think it's really important in this era of remote working, remote teams. My team is spread across multiple locations, and the FanDuel team was the same thing. You need to assume that the other person is doing the right thing in order for trust to be a sort of foundation of that relationship.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a quote that says something, and I forget who said it, something along the lines of, if you want to be trusted, you need to trust.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll find a link to the quote for listeners in case you're curious, because that's definitely not exactly it. It was much more eloquent, but the idea is that you need to actually take that leap of faith to trust someone else before they're going to trust you, or as they are trusting you. Even for those of us that have been burned before. I mean, I've had co-founder issues in the past. I started my first business with my best friend at the time, and he and I are just now, 5 or 6 years later, mending our friendship after, not having the outcome that we wanted. So I completely understand, how these sorts of things can kind of break down. And we didn't talk about Relish yet, and we'll definitely get there, but it's actually perfect, in my opinion, that you're starting Relish, which, is essentially a relationship, counselor in your pocket, because of your experience, not only living and, having this relationship, but working with your husband and majorly high intensity, high stress environment of building a massive company from zero. And so that's so cool. So let's go back to the story. So now you're at where we left off, was you're at 2015. This new market entrant, DraftKings, comes in. You're FanDuel, as we established. You've got a ton of VC backing at this point. They now have a lot of capital coming in, and it's basically like a war of attrition that kicks off.
Yeah. So football season of 2015, between the two companies, we spent $500 million on advertising.
And to put that in perspective, what can you share what the revenue numbers were at that time?
It was probably like $150 million.
Wow.
Maybe 200.
So well above revenue between the two companies, or at par with revenue. Like, you were just burning cash.
To a certain extent, that's the nature of a lot of startups.
Yeah.
Paid acquisition. But the point that I made earlier was we were kind of forced into this position. Wouldn't have been our choice.
And you were leading marketing at the company.
Right. Yeah.
So you were managing this, $250 million budget basically to go win.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
For a small team. And it was incredibly intense. And of course, when a company or an industry goes out and does that, at one point, DraftKings was the biggest spender on TV in the world. And then at another point, FanDuel was the biggest spender on TV in the US. I think we're the biggest spender on Facebook in the world. It was crazy levels of spend. But it was done as thoughtfully as we could possibly do it. As a company, FanDuel had a history of being deeply disciplined about their approach to growth. And we maintained that even, despite the craziness. And then, if two companies go out and spend that much money on advertising, people are going to notice, right? And by people, I don't necessarily mean users.
Yeah, people that live in White Houses in certain capital cities.
So, that was the next sort of 9 months of the company's existence was, okay, we now have to go and clarify the meaning of fantasy sports. Is it a game of skill or is it a game of chance? To your point earlier around the regulations for gaming, there were about 22 states across the country where it was not clear in the state legislation whether this was a game of chance or a game of skill. If it was a game of chance, it would be illegal. If it was a game of skill, it would be legal. And we had to clarify the law in around about 22 states, which took a lot of time and a lot of money.
So you're burning money on marketing and legal and compliance now. I mean, and as someone that's played fantasy sports and have friends that have played, and I'm not really big into sports these days, but years ago, you know, I have friends that consistently could win, right? And so it seems clear that it's a game of skill, but I'm not a regulator.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, that was a painful process, but we got through it. And then we entered into merger discussions with DraftKings. So that took about a year. And then the FTC decided that was anti-competitive and blocked the merger. And it was really after that point that the founders all left the company and went our separate ways and started new businesses.
And there's a part of the story that has come out. There was a book written by a Sports Illustrated author, blanking on the name of the book. Can you remind me?
Yeah, Billion Dollar Fantasy.
Billion Dollar Fantasy. And in that book, they reference that after all those years of building, KKR came in, one of the private equity funds, and invested, and the founders got diluted to near zero. Is that true, or you know what's the story there? You know, you built a multi-$100 million revenue company at that point, probably $1 billion plus multi-billion dollar valuation business, and the story goes that you all founders walked away with nothing.
So yeah, we took money from private equity. KKR and Shamrock were the two private equity companies, and we raised about $450 million.
Wow.
And you know, you raise that much money, and you are diluted, of course. And yeah, we going into 2018, after the founders had all left, there was a merger with Paddy Power Betfair. And as a result of that merger, the founders, the early employees, anyone who was an ordinary shareholder, were basically wiped out as a result of the merger.
What is, if in case there are founders listening, we talked about this a little bit last time, I remember now, but like, what would you recommend to a young founder who's getting involved with these VCs and with eventually private equity funds, that all they do is structure terms, and they know exactly how to structure terms such that they're preferential and they get paid out before the founders and whatnot? What do you recommend to founders to protect themselves? I mean, you had, by all intents and purposes, a successful company outcome. You went to war. You built this business. You took on the competition massively. You raised a ton of capital. You did everything right. The probability of success is minuscule at that level. And yet still in the end, the outcome for you and the partners wasn't there. So like, what would you advise young founders who are just getting started? How can they protect themselves?
So there's a few things that spring to mind. So first of all, the reason that we ended up with nothing was not to do with dilution. There's a lawsuit underway right now where basically it's all tied in with the merger transaction. I'm not really going to go into details about it here.
Yeah, for sure. I get it.
You know, I think the main takeaway for me is really do your due diligence on any investor that you're going to take money from. Taking money from an investor is a bit like going into a marriage. Like, I'm not being overly dramatic here. You're going to be working with this person for maybe up to 10 years, maybe longer. So you need to know who you're getting into bed with. You need to really be thoughtful about who this person is and what their reputation is, and talk with founders that they've worked with in the past in companies where they haven't necessarily just gone and hockey sticked. You know, who are the founders, the companies that they've invested in where it's not all been up and to the right, and how did they act, and how did they behave, and how supportive were they of the founding team, and did they always do the right thing for the company? Those are the kind of questions that you should be asking. And if during that process there are any even yellow flags, then just walk away.
So hard for a founder to get a term sheet from an investor and walk away from it.
And people will be listening to this and say, yeah, I'm sure it can't be. Like, I'm not going to say I told you so, but so you have to be very thoughtful about who you get into bed with.
Yeah, as they say, a thorn of experience is worth a wilderness of warning. So you've had the experience, you know, you've had a wilderness of experience. You're sharing with everyone, but we'll see how they react to that. Another point I want to touch on, and I do want to get into Relish, and we will. You know, you were also a mother at this time, and you know, we're seeing so many more women founders these days, which is fantastic. So many more women VCs these days. You know, we're still not where I think we can be, but one aspect of being a woman that men certainly cannot replicate is being a mother, you know? And so what was it like being a mother while starting and working on a new mother as well, while starting and working on this company, this massive undertaking?
Yeah, I mean, you don't get a moment to yourself. That's it. You make sacrifices, right? But the important thing for me and everything, and I had another child, so I have 3 children. I had 2 before we started.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize. So you already had, how old were the other 2?
Now or then?
Then, if you can, we can do the math.
So in 2013, I had a baby, and the other 2 were 6 and 9.
Okay, wow. Boys or girls of the 3?
The 2 boys and then the little girl.
Oh, wow. My family's the opposite. I've got 2 older sisters and then me. I came late.
Right. Spoiled one.
I'm the spoiled one for sure. The parents are, you guys are already tired at that point, you know, parents are already broken in, so to speak. It's like, all right, just do what you want. I've had enough. I want to watch TV or build my business. In your case, I doubt you had much time for TV.
But I think for me, it was really important for me to show my kids that, you know, my role in what we built, and to role model that, you know, I grew up with a mom who was a stay-at-home mom. She was amazing. She was there for me every single day. She cooked and baked and cleaned her house every single day and was an amazing housekeeper, and she was wonderful. But that's not me, and that's not who I am. And I wanted to show my kids that the role of a mother is not just that. And that's been really important to me. And, you know, my daughter will talk about, you know, when she grows up, she wants to be whatever it is, at the time, it might be a singer or whatever. And then she'll be, I want to be a mom as well. And, you know, having those kind of conversations with my daughter is really important to me. And I'm really glad that they can see what, you know, they don't really understand at the moment, but when they're older, they can look back and say, wow, mom did that. And that's pretty cool.
I want to go back to something you said earlier. You know, interesting that you were left off the deck. When did they add you onto the deck? When did you end up on the website? When was it okay, you know, to say Lesley is a part of this founding team?
Yeah, I think it was always on the website. I was never on the deck. I do remember really wishing that I hadn't changed my name when I got married and had kept my maiden name, and it would have made life a little bit easier. But whatever, it's kind of ancient history now.
I'm actually I'm working with a company right now, so I don't even know if my listeners know that this is not my full-time job. Like I work as a business consultant to startup companies. Been an venture investor 2 years prior to this, and started 2 companies of my own prior to that. And I'm also a recovering investment banker. But at one of the companies that I'm actually working with, recovering, capital R, one of the companies that I'm working with right now actually is a very similar situation. They just moved to New York. I'm going to introduce you guys. Husband and wife. The wife leads marketing. The husband is considered the founder. She has her original last name, her maiden name in the deck, and they have a 1-year-old child. Shout out to Winston. He's so cute. But yeah, they're working together, and it's interesting to see actually how the company, in a way it's just an addition to the family. I always think of businesses as like another child. Like you are birthing something as an entrepreneur. You're bringing an idea to life. So it's like, they have 2 cats, Winston, and then the company, and it's like the 4th sibling.
Yeah. And I used to feel that way too. I used to feel like my company was my child. And I think, through the experiences that we've had, I've realized that you do have to somewhat distance yourself from company, not your child, because somebody's going to come along and take over, or, you'll sell it, or, there has to be an exit at some point. So there's a certain amount of emotional distancing that, the more experience you've had, as soon as you're like 2nd or 3rd time entrepreneur, you realize it's not your baby. It's certainly, you're very passionate about it, and you're going to do everything that you can to make sure that it survives. But it's very different.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I'm glad that you brought that up. Again, I mentioned this as someone that started 2 companies. I would go so far to say that I not only treated it like my child, but I treated them as an extension of myself. And so everything that happened within the company completely determined my own self-worth. And when the odds are stacked against you, as they are in a startup, that's a really dangerous position to put yourself into. So I appreciate that clarification for listeners. Like, that's super important. If you are starting a company, it's not you and it's not your child. It's just, you can be passionate about something without conflating those two. So yeah, that's a really, really valid point. So I guess you said, you didn't have time for yourself, but I mean, we live in this world now, I think, where we still have the cult of productivity, right? And, everybody always wants to be on, and it's, what are you doing today? And what have you done lately? And do. But we also are starting to see kind of infiltrate into Silicon Valley, kind of the health and wellness, taking care of your own house, taking care of your spiritual well-being, your emotional well-being, mental health, which are all really positive trends. Did you have any practices that you put in place at that time, whether they were, organized practices like I'm going to meditate right now, or just something that emerged that helped you get through all of the stress?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say I learned to actually around the time when I was pregnant in 2012, 13, I'd actually lost a number of babies. That's why we have such a big age gap. And I ended up doing self-hypnosis. And this self-hypnosis was really, it was back in 2011, 2012, where meditation wasn't a thing. It was a thing in India, but it definitely wasn't a thing in Scotland. And I remember I would take myself off to the bathroom maybe 3 or 4 times a day at work and just breathe. And that was what got me through that incredibly tough time of losing lots of babies, and then being pregnant, while still trying to build a business. And I that experience set me up really well for the hyper growth period where you are under a lot of pressure, or a lot more pressure, and then the period after that with all the legal battles where you were wondering, where is this going to end? And I think that was a really good practice to get into, just that control and the breathing and the mindfulness on a regular basis set me up pretty well for dealing with the level of stress that we were under. Nowadays, I go shopping instead. I'm a big fan of Home Goods. Every weekend, I'm like, I'm off to meditate in Home Goods. Thank you. Bye.
I mean, everybody has their own practice. I honestly think, and I love you, Mom, don't get mad, but I honestly think that going to Home Goods and doing laundry is possibly my mom's greatest meditation. Like, she'll put like one piece of clothing up in a wash. Like, I got to do the wash. I'm like, Mom, you love doing laundry. Like, she really does. I swear this is true. So everybody has their own practices. It doesn't have to be, super spiritual or woo-woo or whatever. Whatever reconnects you to yourself and takes you off of that mental train is super helpful. Wow. So that's crazy. So you also experienced some serious challenges with childbirth. That must have been really hard.
It was, and it was the only time in my life that I actually went to therapy, and just did talk therapy with a local counselor for maybe about 6 months in conjunction with the self-hypnosis, and it really helped. Happy to say that finally got my baby in 2013.
Miracle.
She's an absolute treasure. And I think, the longer you wait for something, the better it is, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm someone that's done cognitive behavioral therapy before. I was lucky enough in high school to have the school psychologist take an interest in me. I don't think I was crazy, but he had started this group of exceptional students at the time. Everyone was super stressed, and in public school, there's a heavy focus on not leaving anyone behind, but he felt there wasn't a focus on the students that were excelling, but maybe still struggling with mental health issues because of the demands to excel, in that environment. And I have to say, without Dr. Sefik, shout out Sefik, I don't think I would have gotten through like going to the running of the bulls at Wharton and investment banking and startup life and all that stuff without the tools that we shared. And part of my tools that I often forget is just like laughing at myself. Like the cosmic joke that is life. It's like so nice to just laugh a little bit. And so I do want to move on to Relish, but I want to ask you kind of one more thing about that time in your life, like, coming off of, well, actually I have a couple more things. So coming off of FanDuel, I guess you had built something really special. You had built a family as well, which is also really special. And maybe even now, like what are you most proud of right now?
What am I most proud of? That's a tricky question. Honestly, I think I'm most proud of the family that we have. Like just that unit. It's hard. It's definitely not easy.
What's harder, family or startup?
Depends on the day. Like, I have 2 teenage boys. Like, do I need to say anything more?
It wasn't that long ago. The testosterone is definitely running high at that time, for sure. I was not as jovial. Oh, God bless you. So, and then I guess thank you for sharing that. When you left FanDuel, how much time did you take? Like, was there a feeling like, like an exhale of like, thank God, I need a friggin' break? Like, or were you just like, I got to go on to the next one because, I'm ready and whatever,
Yeah. So the transition looked like in 2016, I stepped away from kind of the day-to-day running the business. I stayed on the board for a year after that. Meanwhile, we moved to the States. So, me stepping away allowed us to make the move to the States. 2017 was when we all left FanDuel for good. And I had about 4 months then of being FanDuel free, if you like. And I really had this sense of being able to breathe again for the first time in a long time. And I know that sounds overly dramatic, but that is very much what it felt.
As anyone that started a company, I mean, you worked on it for how many years? You were working on it for
10 years.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, God, the most I've gone was 3, and the exhale is.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Yeah. So that was the initial feeling. And the second feeling was I am never going to do another startup in my life, because that was incredibly tough. And then the third feeling was, well, that's kind of all I know. And I do want to do something impactful, but this time I want it to be genuinely about making the world a better place. After all we'd been through, I had this overwhelming feeling of, I literally want to give the world a hug and make it a better place. And whatever it is that I do next, I want it to be as big and as impactful and powerful as FanDuel was, but with much more of a mission-driven approach and really focusing on improving people's lives.
I want to dig into that a little bit, because there's this kind of trope in Silicon Valley, which is like, a company is going to take 10 years. And so you better start something that you're passionate about, or something that you deeply believe in. And I might be jumping to a conclusion, but I don't assume that you were deeply passionate about fantasy sports betting.
I certainly wasn't before I started FanDuel. Certainly wasn't. I was deeply passionate about creating this new industry, and whenever I joined a fantasy sports league, I was in it to win it, even although I'd never done it before in my life. I'm pretty competitive. So I developed this passion for the industry, which hadn't been there before. I found that, I'm not a sports fan. If I was watching a football game or a basketball game without a fantasy sports team on the line, I would be bored watching it. But if I had a fantasy sports team going on, I would at least have that to keep me going and keep me engaged in the game. So that was how I got passionate about the whole thing.
So you started playing, and then you were like, oh, this is actually quite fun, and the community is interesting, and you were creating this market. So that element of creation and newness kept you going.
A serial entrepreneur that I know once said to me when I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, he said to me, you can be passionate about a business that's doing well. If a business is growing quickly, you'll be passionate about it. Doesn't really matter what the business is, you'll be passionate about it. And I thought hard about that as an element of truth in it. It's hard to stay passionate about a business that's failing, let's put it that way. But I think for me, it's less about being passionate about the underlying subject, and it's more about being passionate about the impact it's having on people's lives. That's what drives me, and it's what drove me at FanDuel as well, in that I knew people genuinely loved the product. And
so when you say impact, it doesn't have to be changing the world type, it could be as simple as giving people a platform to have fun,
right?
To entertain themselves.
Exactly. And just that I remember a friend of mine was really into basketball, and he's like, it's a Wednesday night, the basketball slate is terrible, but I know if I've got FanDuel, I'm going to have a good night. Like, okay, brilliant. That's the kind of impact that we're having on people's lives. That feels good to me. And that was one of the drivers behind Relish was, how can I make people's lives better? And having seen the experience at FanDuel when I came out during that period that we were talking about afterwards, the thing that I kept coming back to was it was only the relationships we had with each other, me and Nigel, all the co-founders, our employees, the team, those relationships were what got us through the craziness.
And now at Relish, like, I guess this is something I wanted to touch on. You're not starting this with your husband. How did you find your co-founder? How do you think about building the team around you? Do you have a co-founder even?
I know I'm working with our lead engineer is someone that worked at FanDuel as well.
Okay, so you have a pre-existing relationship there, and that trust already.
Yeah. So product and engineering are based over in Edinburgh, where we had started building FanDuel in 2009. We moved the headquarters to New York in 2011, but the engineering team is still in Scotland.
Love Edinburgh too. Beautiful city.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have the trust of the team around you. You are passionate about Relish's ability to help people. Why don't we talk about kind of what is Relish? How'd you land on this idea? I'm guessing you evaluated many different ideas. Or did you even say when you decided to? I don't think you said after that exhale, like what changed your mind about starting another company?
Do you know what it was? It was Nigel, actually. He was like, just start another company. I'm like, what? Don't be ridiculous. On my own? He's like, sure, you can do it. I was like, oh, no way. And the more I thought about it, and the more he kind of nudged me and encouraged me, a couple of months, I would say it took. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And then I spent about a month figuring out, what area do I want to look at. And I kept coming back to relationships, and I kept thinking, if I could come up with a product in this space, it would really help people. What we know about people who end up in couples therapy is they leave it too late. By the time they get there, it's like a 50% success rate. The other 50% end up divorcing. So how can we help people earlier, before it gets too bad? And that was my starting point. That was my jumping off point.
And so what is Relish exactly?
Relish is a relationship trainer. We offer customized weekly lesson plans and activities for your relationship. We basically take an assessment when you sign up, and we match you with the right lessons for you, depending on what you've told us about yourself and about your relationship and about your partner. It's all based around science. We have a team of advisors from various universities in the States.
Yeah, I've signed up, downloaded the app, taken the quiz, very comprehensive. So I was curious how you developed the questions.
Yeah, we worked closely with various professors of relationship science and psychology, and built it out from there. It's based a lot around attachment theory, if you're familiar with that.
No, I'm not. Can you explain what attachment theory is?
Yeah, it really goes back to how secure you are in your relationship. So there are 4 different types of attachment style. There's secure attachment, and then there's 3 different types of insecure attachment. Some people really appreciate more space and independence. Some people are a little bit more needy and want to know that you love them. And some people don't really know which one of those they are. So that's kind of the 4 different attachment types. And they're really powerful in terms of thinking about what your partner needs from you, depending on what your attachment type is and what their attachment type is. So if, for example, you're more on the needy end of the scale and your partner is more on the independent side of the scale, you're going to have problems, and you're going to have communication issues, and you're not really going to know the best way to interact with each other and give each other what they really need. It's similar with love languages. If you have, if your love language is gifts and your partner's love language is quality time, you're going to be because your love language is gifts, you like to give gifts, and your partner won't appreciate them because that's not their love language. So it's about learning what your partner needs from you based on their attachment style, their love language, and various other components that we've put in the assessment. And yeah, it's been really interesting to see how people are using Relish. We had wondered who would sign up for it when we launched last year. And what we discovered was 60% female, 40% male are signing up. So men are using it almost as much as women. And it doesn't really matter what shape or sort of situation your relationship's in. It can be relatively dysregulated or relatively healthy. You're still going to get value from the product because it's customized based on the health of your relationship.
I feel that, similar to therapy, to talk therapy, couples therapy is not necessarily something that has to be done only when there's an emergency, right? Like I think perfectly sane people can all benefit. We all have these mini traumas that we develop over time from, some kind of talk therapy, whether it be psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, or other. Similar, I think relationship check-ins with friends and loved ones and partners are so important. The communication element of a relationship and learning and growing together. It's like when that shuts down, it's already over, right? So any tools, and I talk about on a previous episode with my friend Blue, we talk about some quote unquote woo-woo tools, and for example, tarot cards. Tarot cards to me, I don't necessarily have to believe that they have a power behind them, but what they offer to me, if I pull a tarot card, is like a moment of reflection. It doesn't matter what card I pull, I'm going to then reflect on that and say, oh, how does this affect my life? And then for a moment in time, I'm thinking about my life. And so it's the same thing with a tool like what you've built for relationships is an opportunity for a couple to look at themselves and look at themselves in relation to one another. And we can always get better.
Absolutely. And the surprising thing for me during this period of building Relish has been Nigel and I have been together for 25 years, which is ridiculous.
A lot of time.
But we are still learning through Relish, actually. We're still learning stuff about each other that we didn't know before. So
how's Nigel feel about being the guinea pig for the new product?
He loves it.
We'll get him on here next and find out if that's true.
But it's been really surprising. And I think even the healthiest relationships can be fragile or are fragile. It doesn't take a lot for things to get out of whack. And we're all busy and we all have lots and lots of commitments, especially if you have children. And is
there are there different modules for couples with children? Because I imagine that relationship changes dramatically when you have children.
Right. Yes, exactly. And, the science all points to that moment that you have your first child. That's the point where your satisfaction as a couple starts to dip. And that just continues until they leave home. Which, if you're not careful, you're going to turn around and there'll be nothing left after they've left home. That relationship with your partner.
And that's the classic empty nester syndrome.
You need to keep that healthy because that's all you're going to have left once your kids all leave home.
There's so many elements. I mean, would you consider yourself now a relationship expert?
I mean, I know a lot more about it now than I did 2 years ago, but I'm definitely not an expert. We have PhDs in psychology on our team. They're the experts, but I certainly know a lot more now than I did then.
So I have so many questions on relationship. We could go for like an entire day. I'm going to focus on a couple of elements that I think I'm curious about. You mentioned one. Well, I'm curious about the vernacular needy. It feels pejorative to me. Is there another word that's used, or is it just that it's the best way to describe this personality type?
Um, I mean, I'm sure we don't use that word on in the app. I would say, how would I describe it? This particular attachment type is much more anxious than the others, and also more loving. They're more eager to give love, and they need to receive love back in order to feel whole. So it's actually a really, a really nice, quote unquote, attachment style, and a lot of our users fall into that category. And I see elements myself in that, where I need to know that I'm doing a good job. I need to know that I'm loved and respected and liked and all of those things. And I don't see the word needy as necessarily pejorative, just that you look externally for validation. You need that validation from other people. And like I said earlier, if you're with someone who is much more focused on themselves and being independent and having their own space, and they don't need that external validation, that becomes a problem. And that's where learning to communicate with each other in a way that the other person appreciates is really important.
I guess I'm trying to think of how to phrase this, because it just popped in my head. It's kind of like, the app is there to support the relationship between the couple. I'm of the opinion that we are only in control of our own behavior, and so we can't change our partners. Is really like, I guess, is the core of the app becoming aware of your partner in order to change your own behavior? Is that how you would describe it? And I guess you need buy-in. Do you think one needs buy-in from their partner in order for the app to be bent to work? Or do you think that I could say, work with the app solo, and gain some learnings that would actually benefit our relationship anyways?
Yeah. So for sure, I completely agree with you. You can't change somebody else. Like, you can't force anybody to change. And I know from talking to lots of marriage therapists, a large percentage of people turn up in therapy and expect that the other person has to change.
Yeah.
This is, can you just fix this person?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That was very much where I came from with the idea for Relish. It's like, well, let's think about how can we empower ourselves as an individual to effect change on the relationship without forcing anybody else to take part, without forcing anyone else to change. And by becoming more self-aware and learning more about our partner and what triggers them and why that trigger happens, and how secure they are and all of those things, you can actually get a lot of value out of Relish by using it on your own. Absolutely, no question. In order to get the best outcomes, definitely having both of you on there is going to make it more effective. But it's really about self-awareness and partner awareness. There's a big trend at the moment about self-care, and me time is a big thing. Whatever that means.
You've never had it. Your home goods time, exactly.
But what Relish is who's looking out for us? Where is the us care? And you can do a lot of us care on your own by, like I said, learning about yourself and learning about your partner, and impacting how you show up every day. I think the important thing is that no matter how short or long you've been together, the other person has a choice every single day as to whether they're going to keep being there and show up, and they can leave. People get complacent, and this is about fighting that complacency and keeping things alive and keeping things fresh and being there for each other and showing up every day as your best self. And that's that's the sort of thesis behind Relish.
I love this concept of us care. I think that we need more us care in society. I think what concerns me about the health and the mental, spiritual, emotional, digital wellness, let's call them trends, is this continued. It's like the Silicon Valley machine is so pervasive that no matter how positive and powerful the concepts are that flow into the machine get spit out the other side with like the valley, wrapped around them. And I think the valley works in certain areas, but when it comes to, meditation and mindfulness, what I'm noticing is this like productivity / competitiveness, for lack of a better word, I don't even know if that's a real word, around like meditation and sleep. Like, how many hours of good sleep did you get last night? I'm on a 5-day water fast. What about you? I meditate for 30 minutes in the morning. Oh, I meditate for an hour and a half every day. Like, and it becomes this, like Alan Watts talks about it, like my guru is better than your guru, this kind of back and forth. And I think the solve to that is relationship is the best opportunity for self-reflection. Like, it actually is selfish to be in relationship in this way, because you can give and take and grow so much and so much faster with a partner to offer you reflections. Like, that's what I value so much about my relationship right now, is like, I just value the opportunities that it offers me for reflection,
and growth
fully. And growth stagnates when you're alone. We're all householders. No one listening to this is sitting in a cave, singing, Sri Ram, JJ Ram for, 20 hours a day. We all live in relationships. So why not improve it? And I think through improving our closest relationships, as people will be able to do with Relish, and those are our partnerships, our romantic partnerships, I think other areas of our life will start to improve as well. It's going to have a halo effect. Super cool.
Exactly. And particularly, if you do have children, it is kind of a ripple effect as well, I think.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're all wearing the trauma jackets of watching our parents interact.
Exactly.
It's like at a certain point, you're just like, is it really just that my mom didn't let me cry long enough? Or is it really, can we stop? It's like, seems so simple, but it's always it's always about the parents. I feel like if I'm not a parent yet, so you can correct me, but if you live to become a parent, you live to mess up your children eventually. Like, there's no getting around it. Yeah,
you certainly get blamed for it. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, back to the teenage boys.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well. Well, Lesley, thank you so much. I guess I'd like to offer you the opportunity to say anything else to the listeners, anything that comes to mind. I just so greatly appreciate you and your time, double time, and the opportunity to reconnect. I loved our first conversation. I love this one as well. So thank you.
No, great. This has been great, Mark. The last one was great and this one was great. In terms of a message to the listeners, I would just say, look, life's too short to be in a relationship that's not as good as it can be. Let's all start looking after us and doing something about that and taking care of each other. And good luck.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lesley.
All right.
And good luck to you. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you're enjoying the podcast. It's been a really fun ride so far. I just get so excited every time I meet some of these incredible people and just love sharing their stories and ideas with you all. You can learn more about the show at thelookuppodcast.com. That's THE, lookuppodcast.com. You can follow me on social media at Wark Meinstein, WARCMEINSTEIN, on both Twitter, Instagram, and Medium, and Facebook. We have a Facebook page for the show as well, The Lookup Podcast. on Facebook. So check us out. You can also subscribe to our mailing list on the website for more future updates. If there's anything from the show that you want to catch, I've posted that in the show links for you to check out. And if there's any way that I can improve, please let me know. Feel free to reach out. If you have any guest recommendations, please let me know. Other than a couple of individuals who are helping me out in the background, this is a passion project and I'm always open to feedback and any kind of support. I want to thank Sam Palumbo and Patch Kid Music for the sound editing and the intro and outro song that he created. And I want to thank Hello There Collective for their support on my social media. You can check them out at hellotherecollective.com. All right, that's enough for me. I'm sure you're ready to go on to your next activity. Thank you for listening. And please come back again next week for another episode of the Look Up podcast.